Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Reesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Anne Riley, holistic thinker and author. Please enjoy Anne Riley. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Anne Riley, holistic thinker and author. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk about creativity, which is something I never thought I had in my life until I started looking at your questions and listening to your podcast.
I am so excited to chat with you about creativity. And I love that you kind of were able to reflect on your own creative journey and creativity by listening to my podcast. That's the whole point. I feel like that's what I do and why I'm here. So I'm really excited.
Well, thank you for being here. It's really, really interesting and really useful in my life.
Oh, I love it. Well, for our listeners, why don't you take a couple of minutes and let them know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, I'm kind of just an ordinary person. I was the 11th of 12 kids, which definitely informed my life in a very, dramatic way.
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up, I went to school, got a degree in accounting, and I was a really good student. So I was armed with, I was going to go out and have a meaningful life in business. And I did not. And I was like, what's wrong? What's wrong here? So it turned out I was just looking in the wrong place. I needed to look inward a little bit more. And I have been fascinated by how humans fit in the world from wherever. And I thought that as I went to school, I would get these answers, but I didn't get them. And I kept, in fact, looking at like economic theory and going, it doesn't, I'm not buying, and then I would look at some other theory. I go, not buying, and so I finally, I've been reading all my life. I went during the pandemic. I had some time. I worked on a political campaign for a U.S. congressperson. And that really sort of made all the pieces fall into place, because when you're dealing with the government, you're dealing with the coordinating function of our society. Well, and in your body, your brains are the coordinating function of your body. And the brain has to make all the cells work together. And government is supposed to let all the people live together, right? That's the job. And it was like, I don't know, it just clicked. And I was like, oh, I think I think I'm getting the hint about how it all fits together. And then it took a while, about 5 years, and I came up with this Ideasphere theory, which is the human ecosystem, what I call, and it works just like the regular ecosystem, but it's based on human ideas. We create ideas, and no other creature really can create ideas the way we can. And when we're talking about creating ideas, we're talking about creativity, right? And humans are creative creatures.
Yeah.
We create ideas, but then once we put that idea into a physical representation, like we make a building, or we make a piece of clothing, or we write a book, it lives as its own object. It's information outside of a body, which is the first time anybody ever put information outside of a body. All of nature stores all their information inside their body and passes it on to a new generation. But we can store it outside, and it's independent of the person who creates it, and it has an evolution of its own. And when you talk about creativity is like ideas building on ideas, building on ideas, building on ideas. So that's who I am.
I love it. And I love the layers and the pieces that kind of helped you get to this point of looking at that holistic experience of humanness and thought and all of and creativity, all of it layered into this
It's
being
a
that
theory.
we have.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
theory that you have to start. I literally start at the Big Bang and work all the way up through human society in my
Yeah.
new book called The Human Idea. But because it's all connected.
Right. I love the interconnected piece. I think that's an important one to pay attention to. I'm
Right.
curious, when you think of creativity, what does it
Mhm.
mean to you to be creative?
Well, first of all, like I told you, I thought I was never creative. And I'm surrounded by creative people that I always defined as creative. I have my little sister, she sees the world. We're very close, but she sees the world very differently than I do. She sees it in pictures. I
Mm.
see it in words, you
Hmm.
know. And I have a daughter in law who designs clothing,
Hmm.
and she sees lines and colors and things in ways that it's a mystery to me. I have a brother who's an artist and I'm like, I can't even draw a straight line. So, you know, but what I realize is that creativity is the openness to new ideas. That's what creativity really is. And anybody can be creative. But because of our genetics and our experiences, we are creative in different ways. I
Hmm.
always just assumed that people who were like artists were creative, but everybody's creative.
Hmm.
It's just how willing you are to open up yourself to new ideas and then apply them in different ways. Sometimes I have to make my brain think a completely different way
Hmm.
in order to be creative, especially when writing a book. I got stuck on the theory, I couldn't figure it out.
Hmm.
And I was like, you know, I kept rolling down the same path of, you know, humans are different. And then I would get stuck. And finally I said, why don't we just assume that humans are not different, but that they start from a different place?
Hmm.
That the processes are exactly the same because nothing comes from nothing. So and then once I did that, I could analyze that humans use the same tools that nature does, but they use them in a different way because we think. And that got me over the edge where I could develop a new theory and
Hmm.
how it looked. And I just had to use the same structures that were always there instead of the old ideas of humans are just so different that you can't classify them.
Hmm.
So I think that creativity is openness to ideas and then being willing to think differently and apply them in different ways and sometimes just be like, okay, let's try it. you know
I love that. I love that, the openness to new ideas, because it, as you're talking, I'm nodding for the listeners who can't see us and recognizing that, yeah, it is being open. And I'm curious, how do you become open to new ideas? That's
you know
the
that's a really good
curiosity.
that's a good question, and I think that's the real challenge.
Hmm.
But I think the way it worked for me, and I can only, kind of, I'm not an expert on creativity, so I can only look at my own experience. But I think when each person is their own combination of experiences and genetics and learning.
Hmm.
And so it is the job of each person to become the expert on themselves,
Mm.
to become the person who says, you get it. So we're born with no ideas, right? We're born with absolutely none. And everybody from the minute we're born are putting ideas in. But
Hmm.
the job of us, especially as we want to transition to adulthood, is
Hmm.
that we pick and choose which ideas work for us. And if you
Hmm.
pick and choose the ideas that work for you, it's what I call setting your values.
Hmm.
And you learn that those are the things that make life meaningful to you.
Hmm.
Then you get comfortable with yourself. And
Hmm.
if you get comfortable with yourself, you can get comfortable in the world and you can open yourself up to the world. And I
Hmm.
think if we're so worried about, doing the right thing or doing what mom and dad said or doing this and doing that, we're so worried about that. You're trying to solve a problem that's completely dissonant to you or maybe completely dissonant to you and you don't even know it.
Hmm.
So by kind of coming to be at home with yourself,
Hmm.
you then ironically can open yourself up to the world.
Hmm. I love that step-by-step process, becoming
Yeah, there's a logical
comfortable
part of my
with
brain.
yourself, and then that in turn allows you to open that up
Right.
to
Right.
a
Because
larger
you're
group.
spending, you have a limited amount of energy to spend, right? If
Hmm.
you're spending your energy on conforming and fitting and trying and doing this,
Yeah.
instead of just accepting and being yourself, you're spending all your energy there. Whereas when you accept
Mhm.
yourself, and you can kind of, I've streamlined the way I can kind of work with myself so that there's a lot more room to be out in the world. And
Yeah.
I have a finite amount of energy, and more of it goes to figuring out how to live in the world and living a meaningful life than I am
Mhm.
worrying about what other people think or what my mom and dad told me to do or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I'm curious from your perspective, what happens to someone when they've accepted themselves, but no one else does?
Oh, my experience. Yeah. In fact, and what's worse is the people who are closest to you are the ones who are least going to accept it because they've only experienced the other you, right? I went this because
Mm-hmm.
I made my change later in life. I was in my 40s when I made this real dramatic, oh, I get it,
Yeah.
uh, and that's really hard.
Hmm.
But what I finally decided was, well, I'm going to be true to myself, and they will see by my actions that I am
Hmm.
different. And sometimes they don't notice. I mean, it takes months or a while, but when the opportunity comes, you don't say, I've changed. You let them come to the point where they say, you don't react the way you used to react, or
Hmm.
you don't do things the same way. And then you can say, yeah, I've kind of changed my outlook on that or something like that.
Hmm.
Because it's not easy. It's not in your control. This is the other
Right.
thing you have to realize. People's visions or people's opinions are not in your control. What you
Right.
have only can control is your ability to act and your ability to set the proper boundary with a person. All
Mm-hmm.
you get to do,
Yeah.
and sometimes people, or if they're just really going to be obnoxious to you when you're trying to make a difference, you just set the boundary a little wider for a while. It doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
to be forever. Boundaries are movable,
Yeah.
but but that's you have to do what's in your control and understand that. And the other things you can try, but you
Hmm.
know you can't control it.
Yeah. That's a great reminder. Paying attention to what is within your control and how
Right.
you continue to show up and boundaries you set and what that means to you and how
Mhm.
that helps you continue to live the
Right.
life.
Right. And always be open-minded, because that person, it's a two-way street. That person sees you changing, but you're also seeing that person with
Mm.
reacting to a changed you, and you've
Hmm.
got to understand that that might be confusing for a while, or maybe
Hmm.
you've tried to change before and they're like, oh yeah, I heard this one. you know and then you're like,
Yeah.
oops. So a little empathy goes a long way in trying to understand that, oh, I can see why this might be hard for them,
Yeah.
so give it some more time or whatever.
Makes sense. Well, you've talked a little bit about the challenges that you have experienced with getting
Yeah,
blocked or stuck. And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
curious, just in life, what are those creative challenges that you have had to navigate and how did you go about getting through them?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, I wrote that question and I was like, huh. I was like, I don't think a creative challenge is any different than any other challenge in life. It's the same process you have to go through.
Yeah.
But I think what challenge is a discomfort that comes
Mm.
from disconnecting what you are and what you want, or what you are
Hmm.
and what you set your goal to be. There's a discomfort there that
Hmm.
comes in, whether it's writing the book. I mean, I don't know how many times I've written this wonderful passage and going, but that totally is not what my character would do there. Yeah. It's
Uh-huh.
like, I love this, but I have to put it in the, kill the darlings file because it's
Ah.
not going to work. My character is not going to do that.
Uh-huh.
Um, so sometimes what it is you have to remind yourself what your goal is.
Mm.
Simple as that, to remind yourself, well, what am I doing here? Because it's
Hmm.
easy to get off track. You're starting to, I can concentrate really deeply and I can be immersed in something. And then I get out and I'm like, but what was I trying to do again? You know? And it's not, I didn't match to what I was trying to do. The
Hmm.
other, the other way I meet challenges is I think differently, like I did with my book. It was like,
Mm.
I'm not getting anywhere this way. Let me think about it another way. Let's
Mm-hmm.
turn it on its head. Let's assume the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do that. And sometimes it's just a matter of coming up with creative ways to look at the idea. The other way, and this is just apropos to me because I am a logical thinker, I like to think in spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm.
I will create spreadsheets and then I will use the functions to twist them around and turn them into different categories.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's like the nature of the thing. Sometimes it's like how you see them. Sometimes it's how you use them. And so I will just turn and switch and look and twist until something a pattern emerges that I can work with. So those are the ways I deal with challenge. It doesn't matter what the challenge is. It's a lot of different challenges, in life.
Yeah.
That's the way I would deal with them.
Sure. I love that choosing a different way of looking at something or
Right.
creating a system that helps you look at it in different
Hmm.
ways. And there's,
Yeah. And I I bet that different people with different level with creativities that are, like I said, I think there's different levels. I have, if you do those brain tests where they look at you whether are right brain or left brain, I am right down the middle. Every time
Mm.
I take a test, it's like I don't know if it's both or neither, but but it's one of them. But I know people who when they're super creative, they doodle. They
Yeah.
make different pictures in their mind. They look at they put the pieces together differently for them. And there's people who are super logical. They will say, what's happened in the past? What have we done in the past? They'll go at it completely different ways. But I think
Mhm.
what it is again, it comes back to that opening up your mind
Mhm.
to consider where you are in a different way.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. The opening up your mind. I'm then talking about the past. I'm curious, when you think of your own creative journey, what's your earliest memory of being creative?
Well, I count creative as having an independent thought.
Mhm.
So if that, it was probably at the age of 4 where I can actually recall putting together ideas and going, oh, I get it. It's this. That means
Mm.
this. And
Mhm.
that was like, I can still remember it,
Mhm.
but also, I'm not a good test of this because we had 12 kids. So I'm the 11th of 12 kids. So
Mhm.
I'm in a system. I'm born into a system, right? And you just do it. But we didn't have TV. We played.
Mhm.
So we were always just from the earliest time, we were making up stuff. We would, we would you know, play different games. We'd make up tag games. We'd create mazes with the leaves and run around. All the little
Mhm.
things that kids did. We just did. And so a lot of what we did was just play creatively that I didn't know it was creative. I was like, well, let's just go play. What should we do?
Mhm.
But we would make up road races with different things you had to do. You had to, do a cartwheel over the fence or something, that was just weird. But we always grew up just always thinking. And I remember one particular time my little sister and I we grew up playing football. I have 6 brothers. So we grew up playing football because they had to have their numbers and even the
Mhm.
girls got to play. But my little sister and I wanted to play football, and it was just 2 of us left when all the older ones had grown up. And we had to figure out how to play a full football game with just 2 of us. So we would hike the ball, and then I would change from an offender to a defender, and then I would rush her, and then she would pass it. Then I would have to run out for the pass. And it was like, we changed we just made up a game that didn't have any connection to reality, but that's what we had to do to play the game. So
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would say is that we've always been creative, we just didn't know it.
You weren't, yeah, looking at it through this lens. It was just a part of who
Right.
you were.
Right.
I'm curious, with that kind of creative, imaginative play in childhood,
Mhm.
how has that carried into adulthood for you?
Well, um I think that's definitely part of my personality.
Mhm.
I still take a song and make up new words to it
Mhm.
pretty much daily. And um, I always leave my brain open for new
Mhm.
ideas. So when people talk about like commitment, um, I can't say I'm a committer because I always leave a space open for something new that might come along. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
mhm.
So I realize that about myself, and I have to understand, ooh, that there's a cost
Mm,
to that creativity of trying to be open to new ideas, is because it means there's less energy moving downward, deeper into something.
mm,
And that's just who I have chosen to be. And
mhm,
it's also hard to change that because it's been part of me for so long. But
mhm,
I would describe myself as a specialist is an inch wide and a mile deep, right?
mm,
Well,
mhm,
I'm the opposite. I'm a mile wide and an inch deep because I like
mm,
to do all kinds of things and leave myself open to all kinds of things, but I don't go very far. I only go far enough for me to be like, okay, I think I got that. I'm good.
mm,
Let's move on.
mhm,
So in my new book, it is a 30,000-foot view of humanity. It doesn't go deep into physics or chemistry or a little bit more in biology, but it goes through all of these things because they're
mhm,
all essential to the nature of our humanity.
mhm,
So if you read my book, it's not a science book. It's got humor. It's like having a conversation with you about, here's what I'm thinking about this, and I
mm,
want you to come along with me
mhm,
uh, while we discuss how this works.
mm. Yeah, I like how you describe the difference between the length and depth or
Yeah,
width and depth
yeah.
pieces
And
of
it
it.
takes all kinds to make the world go round. You need specialists,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and you need a generalist.
Hmm.
And I think one of my great skills is that I can always, no matter where I am, I work to see the big picture and to
Hmm.
see how it works into the details. I'm a
Hmm.
connector. I've always
Hmm.
been, it seems like when I get into my jobs, I'm that vice president of operations. I understand the goal. Here's what you need to do. That's
Hmm.
where I live, because, and that's what this book is. It's saying, I understand the big picture. Here's the details to let you know how it works.
Hmm.
That's where I live. That's my strength.
It sounds like that's where you thrive too.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Because I don't like to do things I don't like to do. So I stopped doing that. And that's one of the great things about getting older. You say, I don't like to do that anymore. I think I'll stick on where I like to be.
Absolutely.
I wish I did
That's
that at 20, but I didn't.
yeah. Well, you strike me as someone who finds inspiration in a lot of places, but in your life today, who or what is inspiring you?
Well, if you could see back here, I have a lot of famous quotes on my wall. It's
Mm.
because those are my inspirers. I have
Mm.
lots of people, but I generally like people who think, and they
Mm.
think broader than themselves.
Mhm.
So Aristotle
Mhm.
and Alexander the Great, because he was tutored by Aristotle,
Mhm.
grew up. And when he went to conquer a new world or a new people or a new country, he was like, hey, guys get to do whatever you want. Keep your culture, do whatever. All I want you to do is these few things. I might keep an army here and I might do a couple of things. Other than that, do your own thing. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. That's what I think the secret of the world is that we should allow people to do what they want as long as they don't harm each other.
Mm.
And that's my credo and my conclusion of
Mhm.
my book, The Human Idea, is that
Mhm.
this is the nature of humanity, the nature of a surviving humanity. Let me put it
Mhm.
that way. But the people who do that, Gandhi, who looked outside of himself, Lincoln, who had a real problem, had to look beyond
Mhm.
just a war into how we were going to recover from that war. And honestly, his death changed our very nation. If
Mhm.
he would not have been assassinated in 1865, he had all these plans to unite our country that didn't come to
Mhm.
fruition. And that changed the nature. I think we're still living with those problems
Mhm.
in here in America. Um, there are people like Shirley Chisholm, who is like, "Hey, there's no room at the table. Pull up a chair and
Mhm.
make room at the table." Barbara Jordan. I don't know if you remember her. She was a black congresswoman from Texas who was on the Watergate committee,
Mhm.
and she was just so thoughtful and brilliant and soft spoken. And I was just like, oh, I was 13 and I watched all the hearings, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that's an amazing human being. So
Mm.
that's the people who inspire are examples. They model um,
Mhm.
goodness in
Mhm.
how I define it, and then they think beyond and are open to ideas and to making the world a different and better place.
Mm. I love that. I love you're really hearing your inspiration of thought and
Right,
thinkers and being a thinker and that holistic thought
right,
experience.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Mhm. Well,
So,
I imagine doing the research you did and learning the things
mhm.
that you've learned, that you've crossed paths with people who may not think they were creative, and you yourself admitted
Yeah,
that you didn't think you
yeah,
were creative. How
yeah,
would you encourage others to find creativity in their life if they were struggling?
yeah. I think there's two main things. One is I've mentioned it before, that the becoming your own expert, being confident that you get to be you. You are your own package. There is nobody like you, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
you're a set of genetics, a set of experiences, a set of, you know, thoughts and ideas. And you are unique, even
Mm-hmm.
though every single aspect, right? Every individual part of you is probably not unique, but together the synthesis of you is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And that you are allowed to find yourself and to
Mm-hmm.
be that person. The only rule I say, and it's a rule that makes you feel okay, is that you can't hurt anybody. Don't hurt anybody on your journey. If you're deciding that the way I'm going to be happy in the world is to pound on your little sister all the time, well, that's not going to work,
Mm-hmm.
because it it is not. If you pound on somebody, somebody gets to pound on you. So if everybody accepts the rule that you can't harm anybody, nobody gets to harm you either. Then you're free to live in the world of your choices.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one thing. And the other is to recognize that we are born with no ideas, which means education is critical. And
Mm-hmm.
not just education in the sense that we have it here today, which is to prepare yourself for a workforce, but to
Mm-hmm.
prepare yourself to be a full human in our society.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a much wider perspective. And I think that if you want to figure out how to find yourself, you're going to have to widen your perspective. Read lots of different things that you might not agree with, but when you don't agree with them, you're learning about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
When you do agree with them, you're learning about yourself. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to widen that view in order to understand yourself. And then when you accept yourself, it's really easy to accept others. And then
Mm-hmm.
the world starts getting more peaceful. Your world starts getting more peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And you then, the creativity just opens up because you got room. And
Mm-hmm.
you get to start saying, oh, this is so cool. What do I want to do with this? What do I want
Mm-hmm.
to do
I love that. I love the peacefulness and the opening up and how
with this? Mhm.
creativity can come and then has the opportunity to kind of fill that space.
Yes, yes, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody gets to make their own. Some of your, I guess, a lot of your guests said the same thing. They say it in different ways. You draw your own picture, you write your own story,
Yeah.
but you write it. It's your picture, and understanding and accepting that, I think, is one of the things we're really missing in our education of children. We
Mm.
are not letting them understand that, look, you get to do, you're a gift. You get to do what you want. You just can't, you got to let everybody else do what they want too, which means you can't harm anybody else.
Mm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
we all lived this way, I think the world would just be a better place. And that is one of the points of my book, is that's
Mm-hmm.
how nature works, actually.
Yeah.
Nature, if you look at your body, you're made of 35 trillion cells,
Mm-hmm.
and all those cells work together to keep you alive and to keep each of the cells alive.
Mm-hmm.
That is the height of peaceful coexistence, right there at your fingertips, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the example I use. I use nature's tools as an example to figure out how we can actually make better decisions and make better societies,
Mm-hmm.
by using that example. It doesn't come from nowhere, because we didn't come from nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
We are extensions of this other life, of non-human life, and they had it figured out for 4 billion years. I think we could listen to them and
Yeah.
learn a few things.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, oh my goodness, this has been such a fantastic conversation. Thank you
Oh,
so
good.
much for taking the time to talk with me. I just have one last question.
Sure.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Ah, I feel what I call the click. And what happens is, when something like, I'll I'll go along, like I will use this example of, I was struggling with the human ideasphere theory. I was struggling with it. And then I was like, let's look at it a different way. And so I made this little graph of how life works. There's DNA at the middle, and then there's a cell, and then there's an organ, and then there's a body. And I was like, well, okay, so let's put people together that way. And I put the idea at the middle, because that's what we do, we think. And then there was a person, and then there was like institutions, and then there was society, and they lined up like this. And I was like, oh, I almost fell off the chair. I literally did. I was like, and it went click. It was like, oh, I got it. And that sense of wonder, satisfaction, like, I don't know, completion of something, that this connection, that it's happened before, but not nearly as dramatically as that. But when something is right for me, it clicks. I feel that it's like my body shifts in some weird way. I can feel it physically shift. And it's happened a few times in my life where it's really, and that's ushered in a major change in how I approach something.
I love that. I love the explanation and experience. That's wonderful. Well, if people want to learn more about your book, the work that you have out in the world, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah. So the book is called The Human Idea, Earth's Newest Ecosystem, and it's available pretty much everywhere. What I would say to people is if they don't want to buy it because it's a little more expensive than I would like, when you actually get, usually I self-publish my things, but I actually published this one, and it's way more expensive than I would normally charge. So I'm like, so go to your library and get it ordered. And then that would be wonderful. Then people can read it. But I also have a website called thehumanidea.com that you can go look at. All my books and links are there, and little explanations about things are. I have a YouTube series I'm working on. That one's called The Human Ideasphere. And that one I'm putting together little snippets of the book, sort of, discussing them. And that's, though, I'm pretty slow at it. It's going to take me at least 500 years to get through the book, I think. So, don't hold your breath on that one.
Well, I'll put links in show notes so people have easy access. And thank you, Anne, so much for taking the time to chat with me. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
I did too. And I love your approach. This is just so human. It's just so the nature of humanity in a way that we haven't really seen. And I really like it. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, you are welcome. Thanks for saying that.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.